Yeah. So when you start talking about tractor maintenance and getting that tractor ready for the season, there's not near as many moving parts on a tractor as there is compared to, um, the combine behind me, or a planter, or a sprayer. So your tractor maintenance is really one of the machines on the farm that become a little bit easier to maintain, and really probably less cost of ownership there to do that. When you look at tractor maintenance as you go into fall harvest, uh, really the best thing to do is make sure your oil changes are up to date. And not only your oil changes, but a lot of times, you know, growers take for granted fuel filters not needing to be changed as often as your engine oil. And with today's engine and machines, you really need to change fuel filters right along every time you change the engine oil. Today's fuel systems have tighter tolerances, which means they won't handle any type of contaminants from dirty fuel filters or whatnot near as good as the older equipment would handle some of those issues. So when you're looking at getting your tractors ready, I recommend your engine oil changes, filters, and your air filters, and making sure that those are up to date. You don't want to start harvest and realize that 5 days into harvest, man, I'm due for an engine oil change. You're going to create some downtime and some wasted time. Aside from that, from a customer perspective, it's a good thing to do a walk around of that tractor. Make sure no oil leaks have developed over the course of the planting season. Make sure there's no external leaks that you're seeing that could potentially become a bigger problem as you head into harvest. Um, and make sure there's no active fault codes popping up or intermittent fault codes that have been saved in the tractor display panels. A lot of times you can go in there and look at your log faults and make sure there's no intermittent electrical issues happening that might need some attention before harvest. Um, if you're a grower that just doesn't have time to do those things yourself, a lot of dealerships, Ag Revolution, here at Ag Revolution, we have a PM360 program where we'll actually come out and do a 360-degree check of your machine for those farmers who are not mechanically inclined or don't have time to do the job themselves. Partner up with your local Ag Rev dealer to come out, and we'll do an inspection of your machine top to bottom and help you see what that tractor needs if they're not capable of doing it. Some key factors can help prolong the life of your equipment. Um, you've heard a little bit about a PM360 program in that last question. Um, I think forming a strong relationship with your dealer and having that PM360 inspections performed yearly. If you're not very knowledgeable on the equipment or not mechanically inclined, like I said last question, or if you simply don't have time, I think the biggest factors to longevity is using good oil quality filters, um, changing those on intervals regularly as recommended by the operator's books, and greasing the machines on the recommended intervals on the machines that have grease points, um, and not neglecting those general service points is the biggest thing. I've seen a lot of customers over time neglect oil changes, neglect grease, and pin bores, joints get wore, and they wear beyond bearings or bushings, and then they get into the hard part of the framework, and now it's pretty extensive and major repairs. I would encourage growers to look at their machines and address issues as they arise versus waiting 3 or 4 years down the road and problems becoming much more costly. If for instance, the combine behind me, if a customer would go around this machine yearly on their own and look at any belts for signs of burnt belts or cracking or dry rotting. Look at bearings for signs of bearing wear or bearing movement in a bore, and proactively change those components on an annual basis. Their cost of yearly ownership will be decreased significantly, but it will prolong the life of this machine because we're hitting those wear points and changing the wear parts before they get into the parts that are actually hard parts or parts of the frame. Even if the grower nowadays, you know, we're not necessarily a dealer. We don't believe that everything has to come to us to be done. We don't believe that the customer has to call the dealer for everything either, as far as that goes. We want to be a partner. And if there's a certain amount of the work they want to do on their own, we can help coach and guide and supply that information. One big area that I have seen neglect on is gearboxes. A lot of gearboxes, whether it's on a corn head, a combine, any other piece of equipment that has a gearbox, I believe growers take for granted that gear oil in those gearboxes is something they just need to check every year versus change. And today, gearboxes on some of these machines can be $3, $4, $5, $10,000. Where if they would have just practiced a routine oil change on gearboxes on this equipment, when they're doing their engine oil changes or transmission changes, because I think a lot of times the growers believe that, you know, we're going to hit my engine oil, my transmission oil, and we're just going to maybe check a gearbox. I think one area there is that they can really save money is just by simply changing gear oil on some of these gearboxes versus checking it. It's probably an often forgot about issue. You know, we'll talk about, you know, the combine behind me, and I think a lot of times, whenever combines are probably the equipment that's got the most moving parts. A lot of times, an operator paying attention to the vibrations of a machine, the feel of knowing what's normal, and on top of his daily walk arounds. You know, if a customer would walk around a belt and would see a pulley with some black streaking marks on the outside of a pulley, you know, that's an indication that there's been some heat, there's been some slippage. Maybe that belt is getting old and not grabbing the pulley as tight. And a lot of times that type of vibration that starts creating this pulley can be felt in the seat. So not only do you have these visual indicators, but the operation of the machine, the vibrations, the feel, those are things to keep in mind, that if something changes inside the cab, you know, get out, look around, and take those indicators as a warning to what's going on. You know, today's machines, of course, when it's electrical issues, electronic faults, it's going to pop up on a dash. You know, if it pops up once or twice, you know, they can come and go. Don't take for granted that it's just a one-time deal, right? Make documentation of those faults. Take a picture with your smartphone and shoot that to your dealer. Shoot that to your contact. Say, hey, I had this pop up today. Is it, you know, something we need to get addressed right away? What does it look like? Where are we at? And use, you know, the digital aspects of the machine to help guide us to the problem, the feel, and then the visual, you know, of what we're seeing in pulleys, belts, bearings, that kind of thing. If you see a lot of grease slung out around a bearing on any one of these shafts, that's an indication the bearing seal has went out. And even though we're greasing it, the grease isn't staying in the bearing, and it's going to potentially lead to downtime. So seeing those things, making a note of it, and then, you know, whether the customer does it themselves or calls a dealer, you can proactively kind of schedule and plan your service around operation. Good question. And it is possible to over maintain. And just so happens that, behind the combine is a good place to talk about it. One thing that I think we probably over maintain more than anything is over greasing. There is a such thing, greasing. And if you can see up behind me, we'll pivot this a little bit. There's a real good example. We got a variator. Every combine, it doesn't matter brand and type. This happens to be an Ideal 8, but these variators have got grease points on them. And this is one place where we can absolutely over maintain. You can over grease a variator. What happens? That grease will then get slung out on the belt, and now you're going to create some slippage problems. The machine's not going to be able to reach capacity with the crop throughput, and you're going to have to get out here and determine why my variator's slipping. And at the end of the day, sometimes belts can get so soaked with grease that you got to replace the belt because it won't clean up and it won't grab the pulley. The other area is bearings. You definitely want to grease bearings and shafts, whether it's any piece of equipment. Some bearings are sealed, and if you over grease a sealed bearing and pop that seal, we have run. It's just a matter of time when that bearing will fail. I think, when you're looking at the combine, a planter, a tractor, I think realistically, your equipment needs a once a year thorough inspection of the machine from front to back, top to bottom. If you are a grower that wants to have the dealership do your inspections once a year, we can do that deep dive as a PM 360. We come to you, we come to the farm, we do the inspection. We will look at every part on the machine. We'll analyze if the parts are, close to failure, or can go another year. We'll kind of rate those repairs as needed. We're going to be able to see those issues if customers have overgreased bearings, blowed seals out, if they've neglected the belts and stuff like that. We're going to look at, on a combine, we'll look at rasp bars, chopper knives, augers. We'll look at all of that. And it's a real deep dive once a year. And I recommend growers to really partner with their dealer to do that once a year, because a lot of times, we AgRev, we flat rate that inspection. It's a known upfront cost, depending on what type of equipment changes the price of the inspection, but it's a fixed cost. The customer knows that, for instance, we'll say a combine, $850. We know that the customer will know that, hey, we're going to come out, I'm going to get a very detailed, thorough inspection for $850. The customer will receive a repair estimate after that for everything we found. And oftentimes it's a conversation where we'll have with the grower, these 10 things you are more than capable of doing on your own. These 5 things, if you want help with anything, we recommend these 5 items being what you have us help you with. The cool thing about the way we run that program, we structure it where not only do they get a known upfront cost for that inspection, but we tie in a parts discount to help the grower prepare their machine for the next year. And aside from that, if a customer is very inclined and they want to do their own inspections, I recommend a thorough once a year deep dive like that. And then beyond that, a daily walk around of the equipment you're running will suffice. And that's just a visual, on a combine. Do I got belts showing wear? Do I got belt spraying? Hot spots on pulleys? Taking a look at chopper knife wear throughout the season. It's amazing the genetics that have been put into this crop nowadays. Stalks are harder than they've ever been. Bean stem is harder than it's ever been. And one thing that really has accelerated wear these days is chopper knives. And that is one area that can have an extreme drag on a combine in reducing the amount of horsepower that the machine has to perform. It's now being consumed by a chopper knife that's dull and not cutting well. So a daily walk around of things like that during harvest can really help keep the equipment rolling, and doing that once a year deep dive, like through a PM 360 would be what I would recommend. So when you're looking at maintenance intervals throughout the year, um, you're definitely better off to look at the hours of use when you're talking uh, maintenance intervals, such as changing your oils, your filters, your grease points. You absolutely want to focus. It's a two-part conversation, right? Um, the daily maintenance, the weekly, the monthly, those types of things during harvest or planting need to be looked at based off of engine hours and hours of use. It's definitely, if you've got a machine that requires an engine oil change at 500 hours and you're nearing that point and you're only 2/3 away through harvest, you definitely want to shut down a day when it's not raining or whatever, and knock out that maintenance and not put it off, right? Because a lot of times, when we extend those intervals, our filters are starting to get dirty. Some contaminants are starting to run through the bearings. Air filters are starting to reduce the amount of airflow, which reduces the efficiency of which that engine will run. And then, when it gets bad enough, starts limiting horsepower and really can cause some unneeded downtime. Engine oil changes will occur more frequently in hours than a transmission oil change. Mm-hmm. So really referring back to that operator's book and focusing on that hour interval change. A lot of the annual oil changes revolve around gearboxes and different things of that nature we talked about earlier. And even some gearboxes will call out a 500-hour oil change. And I think those are the oil changes that get neglected because the customer thinks, well, it's just gears and bearings in that box. I change it once a year, but if that interval in the book is saying it needs it more often than just annual, and it's a gearbox, I think that's that one takeaway that customers take for granted, that I do it once a year. Really follow that guideline, as it's really it's put there to help get the longevity out of these machines. I think every piece of equipment, you're going to do your daily check, right? You're going to check your engine oil, you're going to check your transmission oil, you're going to check hydraulic oil if it's got a separate reservoir. Those things got to be checked. On a combine, as we're going into the harvest season, in a month or so here, you want to pop the side panels. Whether, every farmer has a different philosophy on whether they blow their combine off at night or in the morning. But when we're talking combine, that's a daily thing that needs to be done. It needs to be blown off with compressed air. A lot of heat, a lot of static charge that a lot of growers overlook gets created. And if we've got dust particles and static charge, we got a lot of opportunity for thermal event. So during those rounds, do your walk around after you blowed your combine off. Look for, oil leaks on the side of the combine. Look for any oil leaks around your gearbox shafts, your outputs on your gearboxes. If you start the season with your machine well maintained as far as gearbox oil levels, greased well, and properly maintained, if you start the season there, you're going to know if you see a shaft seal leaking out of a gearbox up here behind me. If you see some oil starting to running down, you're going to know that that's fresh. That's not residue that was left over from the harvest 2 years ago, because believe me, I've saw it where customers don't maintain and it's just a buildup of residue, and it's been like that for years. We don't worry about that. No, start every season off on the right page, and then when you see that little bit of a leak, you got an indicator. Hey, we need to check the oil in that gearbox, because we may be low. And continue that walk around, all the way around the machine. Get up on the engine and really look for leaks, any indications of bearings, sling and grease, is a real indicator of a bearing failure. and whatnot. And do that walk around daily, and it'll become habit and routine, and you can knock that out in 15 minutes before you get your day started. So I think the biggest thing, when we talk about cleaning machines, I recommend compressed air on combines throughout harvest. Um, you know, Using compressed air, whether or a lot of times they got air compressors with high flow, um, high volumes of air. Really can't do any damage there. But I have seen a lot of people use pressure washers to really really clean them up at the end of the year. And I will say that we can do a lot of damage with a pressure washer. We can get pressure washers too close to bearings and shoot water up in the seals of the bearings, which creates rust inside the bearing. And that bearing may not fail, right away if you're testing it and whatnot. But you get into the harvest, a couple weeks into harvest, that bearing's going to show its head where you've shot water into it. Electrical components nowadays. If a customer is going to use a pressure washer to really clean up a machine, keep it away from the electrical components, and just do not blow high pressure water directly on any electrical components or harnesses. At the end of the day, some low pressure water is not going to hurt those components, but by all means, that's the biggest thing that we see from a dealer standpoint, where somebody's tried to clean something too good with high pressure, and we've got into an ECM or a controller and inevitably have ruined it, and it has to be replaced. When you're looking at used equipment, really the only thing that's going to change is probably your annual repair cost, right? A used piece with a high volume of hours is inevitably going to have some more opportunity for wear parts to have to be changed, and more money spent to get it up to speed. What I would recommend, on the used side of things, is a lot of the used equipment is sold with, like a verified dealer inspection or known hours of last services and things. And really, there's some really good used equipment out there. And when you get that used piece of equipment, the best thing that I can tell a grower is, hey, get that operator's manual of that equipment. Understand the maintenance intervals. Understand where that piece of equipment is at in its kind of stage of life, right? Go through and do a very thorough PM360 inspection, or a very thorough inspection on your own as a grower, and make a list of those items that I have to fix this year to get through harvest, the items that maybe I need to fix, and the items that, hey, this is in really good shape, it'll go a year. And really focus on the working capital that you have to put in that machine, and see how much of that you can do to get it up to, repaired back up to as close to like new or usable condition that you can afford. And a lot of times that can help reduce the amount of downtime that you have when you go the used route, right? Because there are a lot of good opportunities to find a used machine cheaper than costs the new. But if you're going to have to go into it putting X amount of money in it, hey, it becomes easier to manage and still keep the uptime. And with today's retrofit capabilities of technology, you can take that used equipment, that older equipment, and retrofit some of the latest technologies onto the older equipment to help drive efficiencies on the farm and some ROI in that particular application on the farm, and still do a really good job with the work at hand. There's things that the consumer can ask for. They can go as far as having oil samples pulled on engine oil, transmission, hydraulic oil, and they can send that out to an oil analysis lab, because none of us can see through gearboxes of the engines and know that, hey, I've got an oil sample with high iron or high copper or something. So you can have oil analysis pulled, sent to a lab. A lot of times the dealers We'll share the background, the history, the repair history of the tractor, combine, whatever. And oftentimes, if the consumer, if they request an inspection, um, you know, that dealer itself will do it, or we have actually went um, kind of as a third party consultant before and done an inspection so that they get a non-biased opinion of the equipment. And that's another real good way to get a true answer of how that piece of used equipment is being presented. Get a third party dealer to come out and do their inspection and give you the report and get that non-biased opinion. If it's one of those purchases that a lot of growers that are buying used equipment, even though it's used, it still might be the newest thing they've got on their farm. And it's a big deal. It could be one of those pieces that if a guy's buying a combine, he wants to buy that used combine and plans to run it maybe 7, 8, 10 years, right? I mean, we still have a lot of growers that don't roll their equipment every year. So those are probably the two things that I would recommend. Have oil analysis pulled and a good inspection done by a technician. We're a dealership and a service department that really wants to be a partner with our growers. We want to meet them, number one, at the farm, at their place of doing business, because it's easier for them, right? It's easier for them when we come to them, and a lot of times it reduces the amount of downtime. And we know that not every farm is at the same position. Not every farm is in the position to let us do 100% of their service work. And we're okay with that. We want to help the grower be successful. Oftentimes, we want them to be more successful at the end of that day than we are, because their success is what our success will hinge on. And if they're a grower that just wants some support via a telephone call or via some instruction on how to do certain things, we truly try to meet them where they're at. And not only where they're at by their physical location, but where they're at in their journey on their farm financially, and what they can afford to have us do is something else we look at, and really just try to be a solutions provider that listens to their needs and just comes back with the resolution to the problem.